Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ILN Talk Show, a free space to discuss different developments in Muslim majority countries and beyond. And today, this is the 10th episode, and we have Mr. Ali Salman, the CEO of the Islamic Liberty Network, and I am Tasnim, the ILN Editorial Associate. And today, we're going to be talking about something very recent that took place on the 22nd and the 23rd of March. It's the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers. We're going to talk about the Organization of Islamic Cooperation meeting between the foreign ministers of the 57 Muslim countries. It took place in Pakistan. And Mr. Ali Salman is based in Pakistan, and we're going to ask him about, his thoughts and comments on what happened during these two last days, and just a general introduction about OIC. It's an intergovernmental body that was founded in 1969, and its members are the 57 Muslim countries that are Muslim majority countries, and it's recognized by the UN. And of course, we're actually interested in this in ILN because we're basically talking about and focusing on the same things, like developments in Muslim majority countries, liberty and religious freedom, and everything that has to do with Muslim majority countries. So, Mr. Ali Salman, welcome to the show again. The 9th episode was about you as well. So that's really interesting. Thank you for being my guest again. And any general thoughts and comments and key highlights about what you've seen during these 2 days concerning the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers?
Thank you, Tasnim. I think last time we talked about the ideas in my book, but this discussion we are having today is much more on the current developments in the Muslim majority countries, as far as seen by the governments of these countries, which may or may not reflect what are the key challenges, I would say, of the Muslim majority societies. But having looked at and going through the proceedings of last 2 days of deliberations and speeches and resolutions in the 48th session of OIC Council, I would like to sort of maybe summarize main messages which have been communicated by various leaders and the council itself. They talked about the issue of Islamophobia. They discuss the situation in Kashmir and Palestine. They talked about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. There was a special meeting a few months back in Islamabad as well, in which they committed to make a trust fund. So there was a follow-up discussion on Afghanistan situation. There was some reference also to discussion about the vaccine equity, and yes, there was also a reference to the ongoing crisis and war between Russia and Ukraine. So these were the sort of main discussion points which emerged from the deliberations and resolutions of OIC, but there were many other topics like the avenues of scientific and economic cooperation between the Muslim majority countries. But that was sort of, I think it was more secondary in nature. I have just summarized for you and for those who are watching the main themes which were discussed.
So there's a specific issue, which is the Afghani issue. There was a funding that was prepared to go to Afghanistan, and they discussed the Afghanistan crisis. And I recall back in August, end of August, early September of 2021, I was part of the Islamic Cooperation Youth Forum that took place in Turkey, and we discussed that thoroughly as youth of OIC. So what was that like in this summit, in the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers? What was that about as far as the Afghani crisis is concerned?
So I think that it is mostly to do the follow-up on the announcement which they made last year to make Afghanistan focused and dedicated humanitarian trust fund, which they have announced now. It is operational with the cooperation of Islamic Development Bank. Government of Pakistan has committed $27 million towards that. Other countries are also announcing their contributions to this fund. OIC in Islamic Development Bank is going to establish, or I believe they have already an office in Kabul, which will be the main coordinating mechanism of dispersal of these funds, largely focused on Afghanistan situation. But in an ironical situation in this particular meeting is that while there was a lot of discussion about Afghanistan, and there was a delegation also, but Afghanistan's foreign minister did not attend that meeting. Also, Iran's foreign minister did not attend that meeting, this particular meeting. And
same here. I mean, when I attended the youth forum, Afghanistan representative was not there, and it was at the heart of the crisis back then. Yeah.
Yeah, that's ironical. I think that speaks of the dilemma maybe in which the governments of OIC member countries must be facing, because there is no official recognition of the Taliban government yet. And while all and the whole world is recognizing the humanitarian crisis, there is obviously a reluctance on part of all major governments, including the OIC member countries, to actually recognize the Taliban government because of their past records on human rights and women's rights. So that's a different discussion. But having said that, I think as far as the fund is concerned, there was progress, and we hope that this will be operationalized, and the funds will be available soon to assist the Afghani people themselves.
And that fund would be channeled through the OIC office in Kabul.
That's right. That I understand. They already had a focal office, and also since the UN agency is also working there, and they are busy in providing relief goods to Afghanistan. I believe that there should be collaboration and coordination as well.
You talked about Islamophobia as part of the agenda of this council, and we all know that Islamophobia is generally linked to the West, and it happens to Muslims in Muslim minority countries, like not Muslims, sorry, but in non-Muslim countries with minorities of Muslims. And we all know that these countries are not part of the OIC. Like, for example, India, which has sought to be a member for so long, but there was a reluctance in there. And it has 204 million Muslims. That makes it the third largest country that has Muslims in it. While many other countries are not official parts of OIC, and there's Islamophobia there. And the OIC meetings in general talk about Islamophobia, but these countries are not there. So what do you make of that?
That's an interesting question. And for many years, actually, India has desired to be accorded status as a member of OIC, simply because it course, has a large number of Muslim population, but this would be understandable because of ongoing India and Pakistan tensions. This request was not granted, and it is difficult to see how it'll be in the future. But I tend to agree with you that the Islam. So there are two aspects to this problem. So one is whether Islamophobia is just a problem in the West, or it is also being observed in non-Western countries such as India, but maybe China, right? And so how far this problem has been recognized in these discussions about Islamophobia. And the second aspect of this discussion of Islamophobia, and by the way, we should recognize that United Nations recently announced that 15th March would be a day to observe Islamophobia every year.
Right.
So this is a global recognition of a problem, and one can appreciate that. But the point I wanted to make was whether this problem is consistent with the main mandate of OIC countries, which is obviously Muslim majority countries where the Muslims government are in the leadership position. So clearly, Islamophobia is not a problem in OIC itself. So in OIC member countries, we don't see, in Indonesia and Morocco and Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Iran, Turkey, you name many countries, you don't see that problem. There are other problems associated with the understanding of Islam, such as radicalization. That's a different thing. Islamophobia, as understood in current context, is particularly based in the West, and more so in Europe, I believe. I don't know what is your opinion, than in US, for instance. But yes, I mean that's a problem. So to focus on a problem which does not belong to the OIC member countries itself is quite ironical, and I think this takes away their attention from the key challenges of their societies, our societies, the challenges of poverty, the challenges of dictatorial or unconstitutional regimes, the challenge of conflicts. And interestingly, I would like to mention, and I like to refer to a speech by Pakistan's foreign minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who recognized rightfully that almost 2/3 of the current refugee population in the world come from or are linked with the Muslim country.
Yes.
So there are big question marks in the lands of the Muslim members of the OIC member countries themselves, and it seems that this proper attention is not being made to these issues.
Yeah. So just back on the point of Islamophobia, we know that the most famous Islamophobic act was recently done in India about the hijab ban, but no one talked about it in this meeting, right? No, there was no mention of it.
This has not come out as a major theme of the conference. I haven't seen it. But hopefully in coming days, when the detail about the resolutions would be available, we can find a reference to it. But this was certainly not in the headlines which were covered in the media.
Okay, but the Uyghurs were there, and the Turkish foreign minister spoke about the crisis, right?
So yeah, that's another exception. I think in general, OIC meetings. So first of all, this was the first time in which Chinese foreign minister and a delegation from China was also attending the meeting on the special invitation of the host country, Pakistan. Officially, Pakistani government does not recognize Uyghur as a problem.
Yes.
But during this meeting, the Turkish foreign minister, as you rightly said, mentioned that, and he said that we need to discuss this. But this did not form the official announcements or declarations from OIC.
Okay. So back to what you said, that the leaders are not necessarily talking about the problems within the members, the country members of OIC. They're focusing their agendas on Islamophobia and stuff, whereas they should be talking about problems within their countries like poverty and economic problems. What would you like to have them talk about instead? Like, what would be the ideal council agenda for the council of foreign ministers meeting for you, as someone who was an expert in that and who followed the recent council?
So, I mean, of course, we are talking about a civil society perspective here, and I do recognize that the government policies may not be consistent, especially because in most of the member countries, we don't have representative governments, unfortunately. And when we don't have the representative governments, then we have this problem. Sort of, then we have like there's billions of Muslims whose aspirations and whose challenges and whose potential is not properly reflected by their government. And as a citizen of a OIC member country myself, and also as of course as CEO of our organization Islamic Liberty Network, I would like to mention that we need to recognize first of all the issue of the religious and civic freedoms, which are hard to be found in most of Muslim majority countries. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion. I think that's an important. That's one of the fundamental rights, and that's recognized by Islam, of course, but also by UN conventions. Secondly, I would like to say that many countries are still shy away of embracing any form of representative governments. So we have democracy in some countries, and I'd like to recognize that many, like largely populous Muslim majority countries, have already adopted democratic regimes. Think of Indonesia, think of Bangladesh, think of Pakistan, think of Turkey. But obviously, almost all the Arab bloc is not included in part of the democratic systems. We have had shining example from Tunisia post Arab Spring, but maybe you can throw more light on it. But since last 1 year or so, the constitution, the parliament over there is suspended, and so that's another challenge. That's the second important challenge. And thirdly, and we can discuss about the order, by the way. But thirdly, I would like to mention the economic issues, the issues of unemployment, the issues of poverty, the issues of job, not having enough productive jobs, despite having, or maybe some would say, due to an over reliance on natural resources. I was in Tunisia last week, and I witnessed, unfortunately, so many young people doing temporary jobs in the streets, not doing as per their educational qualification, or maybe the economy is not productive enough to create these meaningful jobs in which they can earn a respectable and reliable income. So I didn't see that discussed, and I would like to see much and more focus on these issues, which are common. Look at, for instance, the trade. If you look at the trade issues, yes, there's always a talk shop of OIC members should increase their intra trade, but the trade does not follow any religion, right? So trade follows comparative advantage, and trade follows the fact that how much you can produce and what you can produce, and whether it is competitive or not, and who wants that, basically. So that kind of thinking is missing. and particularly in the countries which have historically been relied on natural resources and agricultural resources. We find that that transformation has not occurred, and not enough discussion is being made in our countries on these issues.
Ironically enough, the theme of this 48th session is partnering for unity, justice, and development, which is really suggestive of an economic cooperation, or suggestive of a talk about, strengthening the trade between the, IC member countries, but it's not there. As you said, this is really missing in their agenda. But what you just said now, you would like to have more talk about economy. That's something that we all would like to have, and it's possible regardless of the nature of the political situation in these countries. But you talked about also that we're missing talking about, there's some dictatorship there's some, like Tunisia, for example. The parliament was suspended, and many other issues in OIC countries, politically speaking. But the average citizen would ask, okay, they can talk about economy, but how can they address the political issues when those who are meeting are the foreign ministers, or sometimes, the sessions of prime ministers of OIC members? These are representing those political regimes. So how can we expect from them to criticize the political regimes they're representing? That's like a simple question that the average citizen of any OIC member country would ask.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that the fact that these meetings should be used for not for criticizing others, as the implied debate on Islamophobia seems to suggest, and this should be a forum where we are discussing we're doing a self-assessment, we're doing how society is progressing. What is the private sector approach to this? There is hardly any private sector in these meetings. So you're right that if we can include more private sector in such meetings in the future, maybe at least the on-ground challenges faced by these countries can be further highlighted. Because as we have seen, these are sort of cut off from the ground realities, because the governments unfortunately are not deeply engaged, and in many cases they are not representing the spirit of the and the challenges of the societies which they represent.
Yeah, so this is the feeling some of us have when they follow these kind of summits. Like, these leaders are trying to exteriorize the problems and talk about things they don't have, they don't really control, like Islamophobia, for example. They condemn it and it's good, but they're not talking about something within their area of expertise. So that's the feeling we get sometimes. And following on that point, there was a very interesting statement made by Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, when he talked about how, he said that, I quote, we have failed Kashmir and Pakistan, and he said that and Palestine, and he felt sad about that. And this statement got the international attention, and many Muslims, appreciated it, because he was, of course, stating the truth. But the thing is, while we appreciate these things said and admitted by world leaders, we also expect them to act upon these things, because we are the ones as citizens who could, describe the situation, but they are in a position of acting out and finding solutions. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is true. This was the headline, but then I think the Prime Minister was not disclosing a secret, right? And it's well known. But I would like to take a step further, and I like to say, okay, what is the solution which have been outlined, right? So before the action, what are the positions, and whether there is a complete agreement and understanding on these issues? So there was some for instance, on Kashmir issue. So on Palestine issue, so there is a I think, already a consensus
Mm-hmm.
in the Muslim countries, right? That this is issue of illegal occupation by Israel, and Palestinian people are not getting their due rights in terms of their land, in terms of their livelihood. So that is a recognized problem already, not by just the Muslim countries, but also by the world leaders. There have been several international uh, discussions and agreements leading to different kind of solutions. So that's there. There was some further movement on Kashmir, because on Kashmir actually there is no united voice, to be very frank. So because India is a huge economy, and many countries has many countries in the world, including Arab countries, have deep interest in India. So bringing Kashmir as a discussion on these international forum would upset Indian government. So naturally, we have not seen a similar level of consensus in on Kashmir. But this time we saw a statement by OIC Secretary General that yes, we need to discuss Kashmir more seriously. There was another irony we are discussing many ironies today, but one interesting thing was happening, that while in Islamabad this meeting was going on, in those very days there was an investment conference in the Indian held Kashmir, which is now called illegally occupied Kashmir, of foreign investors and investors from UAE, and Saudi Arabia was there, and also some other countries. So they were looking for investment opportunities in Indian Kashmir from these countries, while in Islamabad, which is maybe 2 hours flight from Kashmir, or less, we were talking about united voice on Kashmir. So obviously there's a big gap there, and there's a lot of work to be to be to be done. We saw some progress, but I'm not sure how seriously it will be taken, frankly, in the long run.
Yeah, so these kind of powerful statements, we often see them whether by OIC leaders or even at the UN. They would just go to the podium and just talk powerfully about so many things, and then that's it. So back to my question again. Do you feel like the importance of these international bodies, whether it's the UN, of course we're not talking about that now, but OIC, the reason why it was founded is to bring the Muslim Ummah together, as we can say, and also talk about minorities in the West and elsewhere, and act upon what they talk about. So as a final question, probably, do you see like any progress in that as far as actions are concerned? Of course, saying the truth, as Imran Khan said, is important, but we need to follow up on that. Do you see any hope as far as actions are concerned?
I, I think
Are we just talking? Are we
I
just
think it
yeah?
Yeah, I think there is a need of a major reset of this whole agenda of OIC, frankly speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is an agenda driven by crisis.
Okay.
There is no goal or vision of constructive nature in these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back in 1969, the crisis in Masjid Aqsa, right?
Yeah.
So, and then we have other sort of major benchmarks uh, in Palestine, in Bosnia.
Whenever a crisis takes place,
Whenever
there's
there is
a
a crisis,
yeah.
okay, we hear about OIC. Now, you briefly mentioned about Bosnia, and we need to recognize that in Bosnia war,
Mm-hmm.
US and UN and NATO was actually helpful in resolving that crisis militarily when it was needed. And we need to recognize that, yes, maybe OIC countries were there symbolically, but the real action was done by universal by other countries or by a universal understanding, and that is something very important that I think OIC and we Muslims, but also OIC need to need to understand these issues from a universal angle,
Yeah.
from a human rights angle. Right? So it's not a question of just a Kashmiri Muslim being persecuted, or a Bosnian or Muslim in China being persecuted, but also elsewhere. Whenever we see aggression, whenever we see injustice, whenever we see oppression, poverty, conflict, we should speak out, and that is the idea of course, Islam as a global religion. When we talk about Rahmatul lil Alameen or Rabbul Alameen, we refer to this universal understanding of our deen. But on the other hand, when we look at these celebrations here, we in OIC we don't see that universal appeal, and that reduces the seriousness of the forum. To be honest, in an international eye, and that is something needs to be changed, and that positioning. So that is a repositioning which is needed much before action and much before any implementation. We need to reposition the whole organization, which is representing universally held values, which Islam also has always stood for, as inspired. When we talk about the peace and justice and tolerance, and that's we stand for, and that's what we hope that current or future leadership within the OIC can consider. It will only happen, I think, only happen, Tasneem, if the leadership in these countries are more and more representative of the societies which they represent.
They're coming from. Absolutely. And
Where
we're
they're
back
coming
to the
from.
political. And we're back to the
We.
political idea. We're back to the political point, because they
That's
need
right.
to
Yeah, we can't escape.
exactly.
We can't escape that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So while I think the conclusion of this discussion would be, while we recognize the importance of such a body for the Muslim Ummah, we call for maybe a revision of its agenda and a more powerful stance of its leaders, and it wouldn't just be meetings upon any crisis. It should be something regular with a clear vision. That would be our.
Not just. I mean, just a small correction. Not just powerful,
Mhm.
because they have been talking about power and in unity for all the time.
Yeah.
I've emphasized a more universal approach in their vision, and more inclusive approach in their discussion, and a more sort of humble and inward looking assessment of their own societies. These things
Absolutely.
are totally missing in the OIC deliberations.
All right. Okay. I hope that our viewers enjoyed this session as much as I did, and looking forward to having you again in the ILN Talk Show. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali Salman.
Thank you, Tasneem.
All right. Thank you for all the viewers, and see you soon in another episode. Goodbye.